Welcome to this panel discussion hosted by BoxNine7 as part of our New Homes Market Report 2025. Today we're joined by two industry leaders with deep insight into London's evolving property market. Jacob Sullivan, Global Sales and Residential Marketing Director at Arada London, and Peter Allen, Residential Sales and Marketing Director at Stanhope PLC. We'll be diving into how the market is changing, what buyers expect now, and where things are heading next. Welcome, gentlemen. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Obviously, we are talking about our New Homes report and kind of delving into that in a bit more detail. So I suppose we'll open up with the first question to you, Jacob.
Okay.
So you mentioned in the report that London still holds strong fundamentals, but it's shifting. So where do you see the greatest opportunities for developers in the next 5 years?
Well, look, I think there is a opportunity in lots of different tenures. I think from an Arada London perspective, we look at every single development in its own merits. Prime residential has been tricky. There's no question about that over the last 2 or 3 years, which has been an opportunity for us to shift to other things like co-living, PBSA. But really the fundamentals of finding the right development, the right timing of that development, and the right story, I think is pretty important when it comes to that sort of opportunity, because ultimately that's what's going to be the driver for that onward growth, especially if it's residential. And where we've seen ourselves is we've mixed quite a lot of PBSA, bit of co-living, and obviously residential. And we're focusing now more on the large scale, maybe not prime sort of zones 1 and 2, but 3 and 4, much larger, much more long-term developments to help sort of build value, to help build kind of over the kind of life cycle, build neighborhoods and communities. And we sort of see that as perhaps the slight pivot of where we're going. But as far as London is concerned, it still holds that kind of je ne sais quoi, I suppose, about why people want to come here. Of course, there's other options globally, but of course, from a London perspective, we're always going to sing London's praises.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that thing is a safe haven at the end of the day, isn't it? So we're always hopeful. Thank you. Now, Peter, you've spoken about kind of a pause in developments and a shifting pricing expectations. How do you see the market kind of adapting along with that?
I think it's already adapting. I mean, we've seen over the last 10 years very little growth in value in, as Jacob says, in that kind of zone, fringe zone 1, zone 2. Zone 1, prime, super prime London is actually, values are off as 25%, which we continue to be told is a great buying opportunity, which I'm sure it is globally. And I think the shift, again, as Jacob said, is that there's been a lot more focus on zones 3, zones 4, where there's land is cheaper, prices are lower. I think we've seen a bit of separation in prices where sub £1,000 a square foot has in certain pockets has continued to perform well. Jacob's scheme up in Wembley is a great example of that, where they've done really well. But there are others as well. So I think there is that. Will that continue to be the case? I'm not quite sure. We've definitely seen that there has been a huge reduction in zone 2 development, but maybe the reason for that is that the market had kind of shifted, but the product hadn't. And I think really what I mean by that is effectively goes back to service charge has been a very big part of that. And I think maybe again alluding to a bit what Jacob said is that the idea of putting up a 250, 350 unit single tower has a lot of risk associated around it. So it's about maybe the typologies that you produce as well. So I think there is definitely a shift. There's no doubt there is a pause. Look, there is some development. There are starts happening, but compared to what the market looked like 10 years ago, it is a fraction of those. And that is perhaps not great for London. But again, for those that are brave enough and well-funded enough to developers to be in the market, effectively you are putting product into the market effectively with less competition.
Fine. Yeah. So that would make sense. I suppose a question to both of you off the back of that, with the completions in London kind of falling short or of their targets, how can developers balance that commercial viability with, I suppose, delivering volume in the current climate?
Well, I mean, I'll answer that from my perspective. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's back to basics in terms of actually the proper appraisal of every single development, what the merits, pitfalls are of that development, what tenure would work best. Ultimately, what looks good on the balance sheet, what's the appraisal going to spit out? And actually, quite frankly, as we were discussing, prime central or residential, especially perhaps going back in the last couple of years with build cost inflation, et cetera, have been very challenging. It's stuff like student accommodation, PBSA, that have actually made those appraisals work and made, especially from an Arada London perspective, given us an opportunity of building large-scale developments, continuing to feed our construction team, which we have in-house. An example, we probably, through planning at the moment, over 4,500 student beds across London, 5 different sites, about to be 6, and it is a good tenure. It's a tenure that can really turn a good profit. It doesn't necessarily mean that the residential will not come back, and of course in various pockets of London, because everything is different, whether it's that local buyer market that's pretty strong, perhaps in East London, London Fields, that kind of stuff, to more central London, where it's actually perhaps a lot more, of course, wealthy buyers, but overseas buyers looking at these kind of prospects. So really, it's looking at it, stress testing it, build cost inflation, sales inflation, where we're at in the current situation, that then will demand what needs to be placed in that site. But again, we're pretty agile. We can flip, we can turn, and I think you need to be in a market where it's pretty tricky.
Yeah, I think those developers that have obviously got contracting arms, they have advantages, but they also have disadvantages. They have to continue to feed the meter, and got to keep those, to have that as a service in-house. You need to find, Jacob says, you've got to look at where you're going to find opportunity, and that might be in different tenures, where you've got capability, but you can service that perhaps better than others. Of course, for others that are more developer management piece, they can just sit. They can effectively sit. But then there is this argument about sitting and waiting doesn't help anybody, because prices are never going down.
Yeah,
that's it.
Cost of labour it's not going to, inflation continues. Hopefully we've had the worst of the.
I hope so.
The cost inflation, but we know the headlines in the consumer. And that's no different when we're procuring kitchens, bathrooms, cement, or whatever it might be.
Thank you. Moving now a little bit on to kind of buyer trends and value. Question to you first, Jacob. You noted that buyers are becoming more kind of considered in their decisions. How is this influencing the design and the delivery of these developments?
So I think going way back, I think you're building development and people have to fit around that development. I think more so than ever, it's about developing for people, and I think it's creating that sort of lifestyle. People are demanding a lot more in terms of amenity, in terms of co-working spaces on the ground floor. A lot of people are working from home nowadays, so it's trying to adapt the way that we build, the way that we attract these kind of buyers to strike the right level. I think it's really important where you have that sort of aspiration, doesn't matter what price, whether you're 500 pounds a square foot or you're 5,000 pounds a square foot, you're always trying to push the envelope in terms of the aspiration. So I think it's important that you try and fit that around the people and target those people. I mean, Fulton Fifth, as we discussed earlier, is a prime example of trying to look at everything in the market at that price point and trying to create something that's really, really special and that's over and above what the competition is offering. So the likes of sort of swimming pools and cinemas, gyms, golf simulators at around about sort of £850 a foot, equivalent to £425,000. It's actually quite a kind of decent offering, and people have.
I think it's an amazing offering.
Well, I can sell you one.
But I think the point is about, you know, fitting the amenity provision though to the market. Is that I think what we have seen either in renters or in purchasers, and there are some great developments that have been developed over the last 10 years with fantastic amenity provision. And I think we had a bit of a kind of power war. Who could put, who could put the more and more amenities?
It's almost a prerequisite, wasn't it? You had to, has it got the 10 things that everyone wants?
But I think what then happened is what we didn't sort of realise is, we had an idea of what things were going to cost to run, but there were significant changes that were outside of our control. The two biggest things I think probably were London living wage. So the staffing costs for staffing these amenity spaces went up incredibly. We had an energy crisis, which when the heating a pool 24/7 and 365 became very, very expensive. And the third thing, I've forgotten what the third thing was, but I'll come back to it. But those insurance got it. Yeah. So following Grenfell, you know, insurance on buildings went up significantly as insurance providers left the market, and all those three things drove service charges up way above kind of inflationary levels to a level arguably which some buyers are now saying it's too much and that it's unsustainable. Obviously, it depends on the scale of the development. If you've got, you know, a multiple of hundreds of units, then obviously you can look at how that cost burden can be spread. But I do think that one of the things that we're now in a phase of, and I imagine, you know, that most developers are looking at in their own designs, is actually either reducing the amenity provision, or I think as Jacob says, is that, you know, with amenities which are cost effective to the user. So that may be you have a larger lounge, but it's a co-working lounge, and you're not going to spend any more capex on that. But it is replacing, I think, certainly I think anyone providing, you know, wet gym facilities in a development of sub 200, 250 units is a punchy thing to do, because that service charge is going to be significant. And I think what we're seeing is a backlash from renters, and we're seeing a backlash from buyers. They're just not willing to have the aspiration, going back to your point. They're a lot more savvy to it, and they're just not willing to pay that fee. Of course, the higher at the price point you go, and the closer into the centre of town, and therefore the higher the pounds per square foot is that you go. Of course, you want all those facilities. But some of these boutique developments, you know, 20, 25 pounds a square foot service charge, which for a place that you might only use 2 weeks a year, it is a significant cost.
Yeah, I mean, every time that I've walked into one of these kind of beautiful swimming pools in Sullivan, there is never anyone there. You know, the guy at the front desk is like, "Oh, you're the first person I've seen all day." So yeah, it's a really interesting point you make. And I think from the kind of consumer side, you don't really think about it too much actually. So it's really interesting hearing it from your perspective.
It's trying to find the right. You touched upon exactly. You know, it's the economies of scale give you the opportunity to be able to put something of note in. But of course, economies of scale normally mean that actually the price point is a bit lower. And actually, when you've got your 25, 50 unit schemes, you've got to look at it really, really closely, because, you know, it can kill a deal quite easily at 20, 25 quid a square foot, you know.
Yeah, I don't know with you, Jacob, I certainly have, in the last year, spent more time in design team meetings considering the day two costs or operation running costs of a piece of kit than I have done ever before.
It's trying to strike the right chord, isn't it? Trying to create something that's special, but without actually breaking the bank. And because more so than ever, it's, you know, with the competition out there, you feel like you have to, but at the same time, you've got to have something that fits the purpose. Otherwise, you'll be left with big bills, not only the developer, but of course the end user.
I mean, there's another area of competition I think that we all I think are faced with, is that over the last decade there has been delivery of some fantastic schemes, fantastic developments. The problem that we have though in today's market, and particularly if you're on a multi-phase development, is you're actually competing with your own self. You are competing with your earlier phases and resales, and clearly you have a new build premium for good reason, but I think that is also we've sort of created the rod for our own back, if you see what I mean. And maybe that's a good thing, but we have to find those new ways to innovate. Are we doing that? I don't think in the current crop, because obviously the gestation period of developments is so long.
Yeah.
But it will be interesting to see, I think, going forward, what direction developers take.
I think it's an interesting point that actually on the kind of competition, inter-development competition, I think, over long-term developments, I'm talking 10 or 15 years, there has to be a view to actually think, how can we change the offering so that it is attractive and that it continually evolves, because over a 10 to 15 year life cycle, technology, spec, everything has moved on, right? And for different people as well. So you've just got to stay aligned to it. And it is tricky when you've got, early budgets where you've got to set them from the very beginning, but then actually you don't know what the next decade's going to be. So you've got to stay, again, probably a little bit agile to be able to change that offering and to almost to refresh everything so that it does feel like it's something different and more advanced, is why you were charging slightly more for it perhaps over the life cycle.
Well, that's another interesting point, isn't it, about with multi-phase developments, because there was always this sort of belief, if you had 2 or 3 buildings, you'd staircase pricing over a period of time inexorably up.
Yeah.
But of course, the evidence of the last 10 years, really, or certainly the last 5 years, is that the developments that have actually been successful are often multi-phase developments where the successive phases have been cheaper than ones that have gone before. I wouldn't say that's universal, but I would say there's more that have had a higher success rate by having a reduced specification, simpler design, more standardization, than those that have tried to continually up the ante. Would you say that was fair?
I would, I think perhaps in some cases, I think probably from where I see it, it's about, the early adopters that are coming into a development in the first phase with a program of 10, 15 years ahead, is that actually that the price point is pretty attractive to get them in the door in the first place. Yeah. Those people then become the melting pot to spread the word and the kind of, for people to understand how good the development is. And then it almost spreads from there. You might have people moving into development. You've got people who perhaps were renting in the first phases that are then now buying in the second phase. So that's how I see it slightly more clearly. But you're right, with market turbulence, of course, you still need to sell, right, over 10 or 15 years. You don't want to be holding 10,000 units or however many, but so it needs to be thought through. But I think generally speaking, the approach is relatively linear upwards, but of course there's inter-developments where it could change that.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you. And I suppose kind of moving in a slightly different direction, but the same, sustainability and the conscious design. So Jacob, you mentioned off-site construction at Arada as a way of kind of reducing carbon emission.
Yep.
How are conscious buyers directly shaping your approach to sustainability?
Well, I think it's probably twofold, actually. So I think fundamentally, building off-site sort of modern methods of construction give us real surety on cost. It certainly lessens your embedded carbon. It enables us to build more quickly, and of course then save money. It brings that product forward in the kind of life cycle. So that's from a sort of development benefit. You don't have to worry about things not turning up on time. They're built in factories. You've got that real eye for detail on terms of quality. So I think that's where the kind of developer sphere sits. In terms of the buyer, of course, a more sustainable building holds more value. It attracts more people who are looking at energy efficiency, saving money on their household bills, and ultimately, I think we're going that way as a sort of industry. Is that the more sustainable the building, the more potential opportunity for growth, the more potential opportunity for that buyer pool to be looking at you versus perhaps a 20-year-old building without any sustainable features that tends to be more expensive. And then just on the final point, I think in terms of just lending, I think we'll be going down a road where the greener the building, the better the mortgage, because it will incentivize people hugely to make sure that they're building something that's different, that's kind of forward thinking, using certain technology, what have you. But it's about the future, and I think you've got to sort of move with the times. Yeah,
for sure. Thank you. And Peter, you're kind of clear that sustainability is now a baseline expectation, basically. Do you think we'll eventually see a financial premium for greener developments?
Well, it is something that's been ever since kind of BedZ development down in South London 20 years ago. I think people have been trying to hope that there would be a green premium to developments. I haven't seen it yet, and I don't think we will, because of the point made earlier, which was it's accepted and it's largely regulated into the system, and so I'm not hugely hopeful. I think Jacob sounds like he's a bit more upbeat than I am about premium, but no, I'm not. I think responsible developers are building these features in, sometimes because they want to, sometimes because they have to, and sometimes when they want to, it's because good consultants are saying to them, well, you can have this product, and the cost consultant's saying, well, it doesn't cost any more money. So that's not always the case, of course, but largely that can be the case. And so developers are willing to put those features in. There is no doubt that modern new build developments are incredibly efficient buildings from a heating perspective. I mean, I know of people that have told me that in development that we produced, they've literally in 5 years of occupation only had the heating on once. So clearly their energy bills are super low. But I would imagine that is similar to any other building that was built in the last 5 years. They're thermally super efficient. Getting an EPC B level B is very easy to attain. What's difficult is EPC A, and that clearly requires a kind of next level. I think what's also laudable in the industry is trying to be sustainable in construction, design, and in construction. Offsite has been mentioned, and I think that is very laudable, and that is something that, from a developer's perspective and from a brand perspective, then there's no doubt that that's something that we're all aiming to do. Stanhope, for example, is a registered B Corp. And built into the body of that is that you'll behave yourself, and act in a way from design all the way through to construction and then in use. But going back to the original question, which is, do I think there will be? Is there a green premium? No, there isn't a green premium. I don't believe in today's market.
I think in today's market, you're probably right. I think the way that people are going to start, my feeling is the way that people are going to start looking at, especially Generation Z, Generation Alpha, I got that right, is from perhaps slightly more of a kind of commercial office perspective, where actually, you're looking at every single aspect of every single part of every single office.
Commercial offices are there already. I think they're already there.
That's my point, right? So actually, it's strange that the residential market doesn't have the same sort of levers as the commercial market, right? And of course, you're talking big businesses, big floor space, and I get that. But actually, I can see that drip feeding in with the new generation. I think, I don't know. Next decade,
it is a really interesting point. It is an interesting point because for example, in a building that we occupy that we also developed, we had one of the internal FM teams come and talk to us about, if you do more recycling, it will actually, we've designed the service charge in such a way that your service charge would go down, because the waste that you generate costs less to recycle than it does for general waste that does go straight, not to landfill, but perhaps for to be used in other ways. And there's no reason why that same principle couldn't be fed down into a residential building, which has exactly the same, refuse and so on. And you could foresee where there would be FM people going and getting a community of people together and going, look, everyone, we really need to be using the refuse centres better. We need to be doing that in an effort to actually drive down service charge. So it's going to be cost effective for you. I think we could see some of those.
I don't see why we don't learn. Well, it's strange that it's so clear in commercial, but not so clear in resi.
I agree. It'd be nice to think that people do move into, a building and choose to move into a new build building and say, well, I know that I am being a more considered consumer by doing that. I think the elephant in the room, of course, is always AC. Yeah. It's always comfort cooling, and that's because it's pretty hard to balance that, having an eco-conscious with the fact that there is perhaps that feature. Yeah. It's all right having grade A appliances and so on, and a kitchen made out of sustainable FAC materials, but if you're running the AC, the comfort cooling all night, then clearly, that is an energy pull.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Moving on to something a little bit more fun, and my favourite, of course, staging, design and sales performance. So question to you first, Jacob. You gave a great example with One St John's Wood, something that we collaborated on in the past. How important is it to tailor interior design or show flats to kind of different buyer types, do you think?
Well, I think there's a question about making it aspirational. I think there's a question about connecting with the buyer. I think there's also a question about making it accessible. So, the right kind of price point. You're not going to be throwing in, probably pretty much like this apartment we're currently in a sub £1,000 a square foot. But it's that emotional connection is what you're trying to create. Whether we entirely tailor it for one market or another, we probably not. We try, as we've worked with you, we let you do a lot of that, but it's about creating something that feels inviting, that emotion comes through. And clearly, where we're at nowadays is, for a high priced unit or difficult unit to sell, dressing is absolutely prerequisite to give you that impression that it works. This is you, this is your family here, and it's so important. The purchase now, it's so emotive, and people want to feel it when they walk in that room. And you cited the 2 apartments you guys dressed for us at One St John's Wood, and and in fact we dressed 4 in the end. And they all sold within a 6-month period of the dressing, so before PC. So it's proven. It's proven it works, and we tailor to a certain degree, but we try and make it as sort of open and ambiguous, but just inviting, just beautiful colours and rich fabrics and stuff. So.
Yeah, it's a fine line sometimes to me, but we're lucky to get the balance. Thank you. And Peter, you said that staging makes properties sell twice as fast, a bit like what Jacob's mentioned. What kind of interior presentation or design elements have you seen that make the big difference?
So it's hard to think of very specific elements, but I do think that if you, one of the things you should do is approach it in a very holistic way. There's no point in putting a table of chairs in and a sofa and saying, well, that'll do and we'll sell. I think it is about, in the term home staging, it is creating a fully dressed home that gives the potential buyer immediately transports them into the idea of what it would be like to live here. Mm-hmm. So I think doing it half-heartedly, I think that's the worst thing that you can do. I'm also of the great opinion, that, and I don't think this exists hugely, but any fool with an empty checkbook can, throw a load of money at it and create something. And I think that's also wasteful, because I think it should be appropriate. That doesn't mean it should be aspirational, but I think it should be appropriate to the value of the apartment that you're selling. Because I think the other thing that we all hope to do actually is to sell a turnkey property. So, we would like to, if a customer comes along, is perhaps for them to say, great, I'll take the flat and I'll take all the furniture as well. Yeah. Because that may speed up the decision-making process. Not always, it doesn't always work. But that then, it's also great fun creating share apartments. Let's not pretend it isn't. It's
your side.
It's a great part of it. It's a great and interesting part of the business. And clearly that allows you to do more of them and think about them in a different way. What did work, what didn't. Sometimes you don't know what's going to work. Until you create them. Sometimes you can think you're being very clever, and you create something, and you may use a celebrity name as for example, and then the apartment doesn't sell. So I think it has to be thought through very carefully in the selection of who you use. And I think consulting others is a good idea, to talk about it, but ultimately not too many. I don't like very, very, what I'd call very vanilla apartments. I also don't like really heavily coloured apartments. That's not for me either. I don't like either of those two extremes. I think that the character should almost reflect, the building or the area or something about, there should be some link. But, I think that's what, you guys as interior designers do. You help to connect those 2 points.
Absolutely, certainly had to up the game given the kind of variety of different developments in a variety of different locations.
That's it.
Again, pulling in the kind of the East London, slightly more cool and that kind of stuff to more central London, where actually the tastes are entirely different. But of course, exactly the same process has to happen. You have to think it through and it has to be right.
Yeah, that's it. And we've just seen such a shift, even kind of going back to some of the points you've made in terms of how we are staging these properties. They have to feel like homes, really feel like homes, especially at the moment where maybe things are a little bit tougher. People really want to look at it kind of through their heart rather than their head.
Yeah, you have to method act. You have to go in and live in a place for like a week or something to test.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Sign me up.
Yeah, exactly.
I think they're also seeing, in certain developments, in certain pockets, this is the interior architecture as well. It gives you, the bits to play on. I think there are particularly 2 developments I can think of that have just entered the market recently. Mount Anvil's a Broadley scheme that's been very successful in the sales market, but used an interior architect that hasn't been used before on a large-scale development. But there's definitely some expression there in the interior architecture. I think probably the other one is the capstone that's just recently been launched down in the final phase at MC Gardens, been done by Ballymore, and they have thrown the kitchen sink at that from a interior architecture perspective. They're charging for it, but early indications are that they're having a huge amount of success. And I think that backdrop hopefully gives a lot more enthusiasm, motivation for the interior dressing as well at the same time to complement that. I think maybe there's a harder job to do when it's maybe a bit more, that backdrop is a bit more vanilla.
Yeah.
Actually, funny enough, it's an interesting point on the interior architecture. When we were launching One St John's Wood, or when we were in the sort of a pre-launch phase and the design phase, we obviously approached Squire and Partners, and we worked both external architecture, internal architecture, and design, because we felt we wanted that to be the thread all the way through.
Yeah,
and it was really important. People really bought into that because it kind of felt like it was thought through. It was really kind of thorough, and of course, having that name, that sort of that confidence that would be something that you could produce, and then we obviously then would dress each apartment individually. But yeah, it makes a massive difference.
Thanks, guys. We're our closing question already, would you believe, for both of you. So if you had to define one key shift that will shape the future of real estate in design, development, or buyer behaviour, what would it be?
One key thing. Go on. If you've got it.
I've got 2.
Okay.
That's okay. So
you can share 2.
I'm going to try and shoehorn it in somehow. But look, I think ultimately, it's got to be something to do with sort of government regulatory, practice, and where for the property industry shift. For the property industry, we have, and I've been saying this for a long time, a cross-party consensus for a decade. Can't touch it. Everyone agrees this is where we're going to roll out sort of taxation. This is going to roll out in the property sector. This is how we're going to help first-time buyers. These are the sort of stimulus. These are the levers that we need. But it just left alone. We are able to have a clear and transparent system where it's not changing every budget, every year, that we can then build on. Because I think with that gives everyone confidence that that's going to be what it will be for the next 10 years. And, over the summer, we've all heard the kite flying of certain opportunities to raise tax and stuff like that. I think we just need to stop messing with it, because that's what's keeping sentiment confused. It's low. It's a kind of sit and wait scenario. So I definitely think that's a massive thing that I think. I mean, whether it would have happened, I don't know. But actually, cross-party consensus for a decade, reviewed every 10 years, and that is what is set out as kind of for the property sector to take it forward and to give everyone confidence to go forward. The other thing I'd mention in all of this is just future-proofing technology. And I think the technology opportunity over the next 10 and 20 years is going to be absolutely huge. We talked about Gen Zs and Gen Alphas and stuff like that, but you're already seeing it, AI assistants controlling lighting, heating, what's inside your fridge, what you need to order. It's mind-boggling. I wouldn't want one in my fridge, but those sort of smart home technology, but just increasing and giving people every ounce an opportunity to control how their property is seen, is felt, and actually it will be one step ahead. So I think those are the two where I see big shifts, and I think more regulatory, government-backed focus, and then a drive for more tech opportunity and saving.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Thanks. Peter?
I think the one thing that I would like, but it's less on a consumer side, and it's similar to a point that Jacob meant, but I think it's been a tragedy that successive governments, but particularly the government party that was in power prior to Labour for 10 years, pulled apart, systematically broke the English love affair with property. And I don't say that lightly. But that is in effect what has happened. And we have more government ministers for land than we've had more years, and we've had a number of, they don't stay in the post. Yeah. There's a lack of understanding that the role that the property industry plays in the fabric of the UK economy. And I think that's been a terrible kind of denigration of duty in terms of the role that it plays in employment, wide employment through the construction sector, and in social mobility. I think one of the things that we've gone backwards because of successive measures is social mobility. Rents are ridiculous, land is crazy, borrowing is ridiculous, regulation's ridiculous, and I think. Do I hold out any hope that it will change? No, but I do think that that having, to some extent, it's a consistency approach as well, which is what Jacob said. But having a strong sense and understanding of the role that property plays in the UK economy in government would probably lead to all the things that Jacob wants, and I think that is the basic problem that we, and that would be a virtuous circle, but there doesn't seem to be that understanding, I think, regrettably.
It's true. I think the levers of tax and stuff like that are pulled when they need it, rather than to having any real long-term reason, and I think it's probably partly due to the government tenure. It's normally trying to win votes and get stuff done very, very quickly. But again, long-term thought, I think, is probably the answer, I think, because, it's a mess, from council tax to stamp duty, to inheritance tax, to capital gains tax. Yeah. So, where do you stop? So it has to be thought through.
And all of that is effectively, that is stopping there being the delivery of quality homes for Londoners. We've seen now there seems to be the only way that the government could achieve the target of the 1.5 million homes is by effectively some form of civil building works. So they've done nothing for 2 or 3 years, and now they've decided in London specifically to try and solve the London crisis that actually it is private developers that help to turnkey and deliver affordable homes. I mean, it would have only taken a sit down with any private developer in London at the beginning or prior to them taking office, and a 1-hour conversation for them to have realised that. And I think that's the piece that's regrettable, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in now.
I think there's good noises coming out, but I think there's noises coming up because everyone's been pushed to make those choices and those kind of statements, which is, you're seeing that the Conservative Party are talking about, abolishing stamp duty. You're talking about other opportunities for first-time buyers, a cut in NI to enable them to build up a deposit. All of those are great ideas, but they should have been in place before it got to this sort of stage. Sure. But I think, ultimately, it needs to be sorted. I think everyone's pretty much aware that it needs to be sorted. Let's just hope that we have the courage and confidence for everyone to sit around the table and actually make those decisions without penalising one particular group. It needs to be thought through, it needs to be measured, and it needs to be consistent for a long time.
But there's no doubt that the buildings that are coming through and they'll be developed are more sustainable, 100%. More energy efficient and safer than they've ever been. Safer, I mean, particularly from a fire perspective. But also perhaps some security measures or other measures that you require. There's no doubt that the actual quality of product and the standard is so high in London. We forget that. We can sometimes be a bit very hard on ourselves and think that what's created elsewhere is better. They've got better amenities or more of them. But the actual built quality today, and it's probably one of the biggest gaps that still exists, I think, amongst buyers that shun new build properties. This idea, like back in the 1980s, that it was all kind of cowboy builders, and nothing could be further from the truth. I think for I mean, and I can only speak for businesses like myself and the business that Jacob represents. So we did seem to have a moment, I think, in the mid 2010s where we're starting to win the argument of converting people who wouldn't look at new build to actually look at new build. And I think we've regressed a bit on that front, regrettably.
Well, that kind of brings us to a bit of a close, guys. Thank you very much. It was really insightful, and I'm sure our listeners will think so. Jacob, Peter, thank you.
Thank you.